So today we're going to talk about what corporation is right for you. And to be quite honest, when Fernando and I got the assignment from Carlos and we heard that that was the topic, we said, wow, how are we going to make this an interesting presentation? So we've done our best. And I'm going to start from the social perspective. And then Fernando is going to go into the more corporate details of how to identify the right kind of company for you. So the first thing, and this is what I always think about, and it has to do with the type of entrepreneur that I am, and it's, what do you want to do with your one wild and precious life, right? What do you want to do? So there's a lot of literature on entrepreneurs, and there's different types of entrepreneurs, and one thing that you need to know before you think about the corporation that you want is, what is it that drives you, right? As an entrepreneur, here are the main things that drive your currency as an entrepreneur, that thing that you just can't get enough of. First is money. Some folks like recognition and fame. For example, Carly Fiorino or the guy from Virgin. Courage and victory. Acceptance, health and lifestyle. And there's folks that can talk about that. But I came to talk about the kind of company that I built because my currency is impact, right? So I care about solving big problems, big social problems, particularly in the areas of health and education, and it's what I've been doing for quite some time. So the first part of this presentation is going to talk about social entrepreneurship. How do you do it, and then how do you structure a corporation so that it can actually, you can carry out the work at the scale that you'd like. And social entrepreneurs are pretty much folks that use all of the tools at their disposal to achieve social change, right? So part of that is folks that have very good business tools, folks that know very well about how to get to their mission. And they're generally known for relentlessly pursuing what they're looking for. So when you talk about social entrepreneurship, things get a little foggy, particularly because you can exercise social entrepreneurship from the public sector, private sector, or from the volunteer sector. So here, the volunteer sector is generally the nonprofit sector. And when folks talk about developing a social enterprise, what most of them do is develop a nonprofit. I run a social enterprise right now, and I've run nonprofits before, and my social enterprise is not a nonprofit. So I'm going to talk about both how to set up a nonprofit and how to set up a company that can function achieving a social aim. Right now, I'm probably at the middle of those three intersections. So I do some work on public boards, I do some work in the volunteer sector, and I do, with my company, Impactivo, work in the private sector. So I'm going to run you a little bit through the pros and cons of developing a nonprofit social venture and a for-profit social venture. And it's going to go a little bit through my story and how I learned about it. So the first social enterprise that I created was a nonprofit organization called Fundación Chani Samuel Levis. Fundación started in 1999, and it's still active today. And it pretty much started with me, a computer, my fabulous family, and $25,000 in the bank. From there until 2005, when I left as the executive director, we were able to secure about a $2.5 million budget. We had a homeless management information system that connected all of the homeless providers in Puerto Rico. We'd increased funding for homelessness, which was the issue that we were working on, from $0 to $13 million a year. And then we had a few educational programs. Now, the thing when you run a management information system within a bunch of service providers is that you know what's actually going on. And we were monitoring really closely what was happening with the homeless population in Puerto Rico. And what we discovered was that the work that we were doing, the funds that we were accessing, they were actually having an impact on reducing the homeless population. The bad news was that the homeless population was getting younger every year, and the programs that worked in education were still not up to par. So we actually did the kind of thing that entrepreneurs who are only focused on impact do. We gave away our entire federal budget to another organization so that they would manage all our homeless programs. So from 2005 to 2009, we decreased our budget by more than $1 million. And with that money, now we had close to $1 million, we focused on building out the field of social emotional intelligence in Puerto Rico. And the reality is that's still a field that's up and growing. So we only had one program. That year, I left Puerto Rico, I left the board, and in part, I left because one of my frustrations running a nonprofit was that we had reached a plateau, right? So my understanding was with any cause, with the type of nonprofit that we were running, we could get to a point. We could get to more or less what we have today, which is a $2.8 million annual budget, and work that was doing good pilot work. So we run a very steady pilot in 7 schools. We have about 700 students, and we have great outcomes. But when you're a social entrepreneur, you don't just want to develop a good program. You want to figure out how you get to a place like Iram did, and you get it everywhere, right? And that's something that we're still figuring out. And I know that Iram would probably say the same thing, is why did you develop a nonprofit to do this? Because that's one of the main challenges when you do run nonprofit organizations. The way that the financing comes in is really a problem. So the pluses of establishing a nonprofit organization, and there's a lot of room for developing nonprofit organizations, first is the credibility it gives you, and it really does give you more credibility than any other type of organization. Volunteers, you get free work, you get tax exemption, you get people to collaborate with you, you get great support for research projects or for pilot projects. Now, the thing is, when there aren't any other vehicles for financing available, for example, in the work that you do with homeless people who have no income to pay anything with, this might be the only type of organization that you can build. And in particular, with respect to education and health, there are more opportunities. So, for example, there's still a lot of access to federal funding, and because schools, which still run, you can run as a business, even though they're nonprofits, and hospitals, the opportunities for generating more money and more growth are available. And of course, nonprofits have better access to federal funding. The cons, of course, access to capital. So pretty much your greatest funders are going to be foundations or individual funders that you can identify, but no one gets any return except for, knowing that their money has been put to good use. So the access that you can get is generally very small. Fundraising is prohibitive. So a lot of folks are currently, looking at ways that they can expand their fundraising base, particularly in Puerto Rico with the economic decline. Fundraising is costly. Fundraising, I think, is one of the only endeavors where you expect to invest, and get generally a 90% markup on what you invest. So people expect their fundraisers to raise, 10 times their salaries. So it really is an area where there's a lot of problems with expectations, and fundraising can only get you so far. The biggest con with the nonprofits is access to scale, right? So if you have a really good idea and you want it to be absolutely everywhere in the world, nonprofits do have that issue unless you get adopted by someone like, Bill Gates Foundation, who has extremely deep pockets. And even then, Bill Gates has not been able to solve a lot of the issues that they've been working with. Inability to access markets, a bias, and this is generalized, that nonprofits shouldn't make any money, so people will continue asking you for things for free. And if you want to start a nonprofit, you need 2 things. One is a track record, a strong track record, and a lot of work that you've done previously, and networks, because those are your only ways to get access to funding. If anyone here is interested in developing a nonprofit organization, I am not going to go into the details of how to do it because it is extremely long and boring. But this is the webpage where you can find the information from the IRS. If you're interested in developing a nonprofit in Puerto Rico, I highly recommend you first request your 501c3 before trying to go through the process here with Hacienda, right? So federal government, this process takes about 9 months to a year, and it's taking more every year that I've been in this. But if you get an okay from the federal government, you can pretty much get an okay from the local government, and locally you're not always sure who will evaluate it. And then here's more information and resources. They're all available on the presentations that we provided, and they're up in the site. Important, there is a bulletin that says everything you need to know about your nonprofit organizations. Every person that runs a 501c3 needs to know what the requirements are. The main requirements are that your bylaws need to state that you will not take any of the proceeds to benefit any of the board members or give it to any potential, you can't have stockholders. So that's the major requirement. So here's the thing. So if you're impact driven, if you don't have a margin, right, if you don't have any money, your mission's just a theory. So how do you scale? When I left the foundation in 2006, I actually ended up going to the Harvard Kennedy School for a program on social entrepreneurship. And pretty much this is kind of the spectrum of where you can position a social enterprise. And I'm going to go over here. So you have your beneficiaries, your capital, your workforce, and your suppliers. And depending on where you are in the scale, so if your beneficiaries can't pay anything, you're probably in a more philanthropic model. If you can provide services at market price, you can probably develop a purely commercial venture. But there's a whole world that is starting to exist in between both of those areas. And still within that, there are companies that are developing in each of those spaces. So generally for nonprofits, you know, there's nonprofits that have grown to be very big. A lot of them are here. For example, Teach for America, their secret sauce is they were able to convince the president to develop an entire funding program, which is a public funding stream to expand Teach for America. KIPP generally works with local educational systems, convincing them to develop charter schools. And there's a bunch of other different things. On the bottom, I put something called foundations. And if there's anyone who wants to develop a nonprofit that actually has access to capital, private capital from their family, foundations are a great place to have impact from, particularly because with very small investments, you're able to stimulate folks to do very big work. On the purely commercial side, and those are actually the top 5 social responsibility companies in the world. So you've got anywhere from Bristol Myers. Some folks could say that Microsoft, even though it's purely commercial, is socially oriented, particularly with respect to its corporate social responsibility. But I want to talk a little bit about the organizations in the middle, and Impactivo that I run is on the bottom. So there's organizations like Ben & Jerry, Seventh Generation, DataBank, who've all decided to go through a specific accreditation for companies that want to have greater credibility within the sector. And pretty much it's called a B Corp. B Corps are focused on being, instead of the best in the world, the best for the world. So they go through an accreditation process. They're certified by an organization. It's very similar to a certification, for example, with fair trade or with organic food. And in Puerto Rico, Impactivo is the only company that's gone through the accreditation process. Pretty much it looks at your organization, the accreditation process looks at your organization from 4 different fields. One is governance, workers, community, environment. And the reality is that you run the same as you would if you were a company, but your credibility, particularly with stakeholders that you work with, is higher. And because of it, you're able to get some benefits. This is the total market of B Corps in the world. There's about 950 companies last time I checked, and that's this year. 30 countries, 60 industries. And what's interesting is that international donors are putting together something called the GIIS, which is a market for socially responsible investment. And there's a lot of folks, particularly the folks that do either fund management for foundations or individual philanthropists who want to spend their money from investments in a way that's more socially responsible, are looking at ways that they can do this. It's still in the works, but it's a place where, oh, I did it. How can I get the presentation back on? Nope. All right, so as the slides come up, there you go. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what our experience has been with this model. So we haven't gone out to look for funding. We started bootstrapping, and pretty much what we've done is work in the area of healthcare, and we do a lot of work with physician groups particularly. What we've been able to achieve is $21 million in funding for our clients, $14 million in the last year. We've improved health outcomes, so we have a measure of measuring outcomes for people for about 112,000 patients in Puerto Rico. We created the first women health center. We don't run it, another organization runs it, in the southeast of the island. And we've also developed and designed a career academy program for about 720 high school students to transition into healthcare careers. We've had double digits growth every year. We have clients in New York, DC, and we reinvest more than 20% of our profits in the social sector. So this is what our 20% does. I think it was Randy that was mentioning earlier on, in order to do anything that you want to be mission-oriented, you have to have some type of cash cow bringing in some cash so that you can do things. And one of our favorite projects is, thinking of ourselves in a different way. We've created Chique Espacio, which is a website that has about 14,000 users in the last 9 months. And pretty much it's focused on providing information for parents, that is for their children's child rearing. We also developed a program called Parque Revolution, and pretty much there you can see a bunch of volunteers that have gone in and pretty much rescued a community from violence and general drug abuse. And there's other stuff we have done. The point is to say that being a B Corp does bring some additional benefits. Particularly, we've been able to attract and engage top talent. So we are a firm about this size in Puerto Rico. We have about 7 employees, but we have about 100 interns from Harvard, Duke. This year we have someone from Harvard, Duke, and Northwestern with us, applying to be with us because of the, they're excited about the work we do. It also helps with a couple of other things, particularly with your credibility when you go and talk, for example, to government agencies or to other organizations that are in the social sector. But mainly, I think those would be the main things that you could do. I also talked about attracting investors, and it talks there about saving money, particularly because there's an entire network of B Corps that all offer discounts to one another. Pros and cons. The biggest pro is extremely flexible, and I'm looking forward to listening to Fernando's presentation in the afternoon so that we can figure out how to use that flexibility to our added advantage. It's agile, there is access to capital, there is economies of scale for volume, and I've been talking about this with some folks internationally. Probably the best markets for B Corps are very large markets where people make very small amounts of money because you can get to scale. Cons, it does have less credibility than a B Corp, than a non-profit organization. There is an issue of taxes. They only work in viable markets, so you can't work as a B Corp if you want to work with really underprivileged or inaccessible markets. And often financial incentives counter those that are related to mission. I'm going to leave Fernando to talk to you now about the corporate aspects. More.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. That was really inspiring. And talking about inspiring, I just want to tell you a quick story while the presentation comes up. When Carlos was pitching the conference to us, he told me, Fernando, I want you to give a presentation, and I want you to truly inspire people. Talk about things they have never heard. Leave them in awe. And then I asked him, Carlos, what should I talk about? Talk about legal entities. I'm like, no. That doesn't really work. So instead of inspiring you and teaching you something you have never heard, I'm going to try to educate you in something I think is very important. Because in my book, the only true successful entrepreneurs are those that go truly granular. And they understand the nuances about everything they do. It doesn't matter if it's process, if it's financing, if it's legal, if it's customer base, if it's markets. Those entrepreneurs that stay very high level, in my book, they tend to fail. Those that really go deep and they try to understand those things that are outside their comfort area, they succeed because they're less prone to making huge mistakes. And if I'm successful and you have a few takeaways after this presentation, maybe next year we can name the conference Hackers, Hipsters, Hustlers, and the respective attorneys, H3A3. That could work, maybe not. We can talk to Carlos about it. The agenda. Let's talk about what business entities are available. In Puerto Rico, in particular, there are like 7 or 8 business entities, and most of them are not worth 2 cents, but I'm going to explain why. What can each of those entities do for me? And let's just try to tailor your particular needs and find the entity that actually works for you. Because if you're starting a business, finding the right entity is one of those steps that you will have to take, and you will need to get it right. What are the main considerations when you're pondering selecting a legal entity to start your business? Limitation of liability. None of you want to be liable with your personal assets, right? For stuff that goes wrong in the business. There's a brownfield that you pollute, or there's a technology that you violate and you have Google suing you for patent infringement. You'd rather have a legal entity to shell you and protect you against those claims because you have worked hard and you want to protect your servings. Tax efficiency. You don't want to pay the government more than you have to. So why pay them 40% if you can pay them 20%? Why pay them 20% if you can pay them 4%? Governance structure. You want a legal entity that allows you to have flexibility, to manage your business the way that you need to manage your business to achieve your objectives. You don't want to have the complications of too many formalities and too many things that can go wrong, which you're actually not paying attention to, so you can try to achieve a simple governance structure, and we're going to talk about that. Confidentiality. If you're going to surprise the market, if you're going to bring the next big thing, why should we allow everyone to have access to information before you're ready to actually launch your product, your service, or your company? So confidentiality may be a very relevant consideration when you're deciding which entity to choose. Formalities, filings, and transferability, whether you want your partners to actually share their participation in the business without you knowing about it, or whether you want to make sure that they don't, so you keep a close-knit group of people in whom you actually have confidence and you want to work with. However, at the end of the day, it's all about taxes and liability. Those are the 2 main concerns that you will take into consideration when selecting the entity. That's as exciting as the presentation gets. Okay, this is the soup alphabet. These are all the entities that you could choose from. So if you go into an attorney's office and you say, I want to start a business, which entity should I use? They're going to wipe out a paper and say, you can have a general partnership, a regular mercantile partnership, a limited partnership, a limited liability partnership, a regular stock corporation, a closed corporation, a professional services corporation, or an LLC. And you're going to be dazed, you're going to be confused. It's not going to make sense. But at the end of the day, the first question, if you're very informed and you go granular to your attorney, will be, which of those entities actually give me limitation of liability? I want to protect my personal assets from claims. So that, gone, 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 gone. Those 3. That's it. You have to choose between the corporations and the LLC. And this presentation, in essence, is going to be an exercise for you to understand why the LLC is probably the best entity for you. That's the punchline. Okay. The regular stock corporation is the entity of choice, as most of you know, for an IPO. All of us want to do an IPO. All of us wish we could get right to do the IPO, be on the cover of El Nuevo Dia, and actually have all young entrepreneurs look up to us because we actually made it. We went public. That's where you really need a corporation for. The LLC, on the other hand, is really the entity that's very available, which has a lot of flexibility, which allows you to do everything you need to do before you go public. So at the end of the day, unless you're going public next week, the entity of choice for you will be the LLC, and more on that. Getting the actual entity organized. Very simple, very straightforward. You go to the Department of State, you do a filing. The certificate of incorporation is for the corporation. The certificate of organization is for the LLC. If you have a corporation, you have to have bylaws. 90% of people don't. It's a very simple document. Just make sure you have it. You could also have a shareholders agreement, which is very, very advisable because that's where you actually regulate the relationship with your partners. And again, whether they can transfer their participation, who owns the IP, who's going to be on the board of directors, many things go into the shareholders agreement, and it's a document that we have to take some time to understand and actually enter into. And the LLCs actually adopt what's called an operating agreement. It's a mesh, right? It's a combination of the bylaws, which regulate the internal aspects of a business, and the shareholders' agreement, which regulates the external aspects of the business, the relationship between the partners. So just to summarize, corporations do bylaws and shareholders' agreement. LLCs just have one document, which is called the operating agreement. Both entities, both the corporation and the LLC, are separate from the owners, so they offer complete limitation of liability. With both of them, you actually protect your personal assets from claims from third parties. And both, at the same time, or by the same token, are subject to claims to disregard the corporate veil. If you're actually using the corporation's money for your own benefit, or you're commingling assets, or you're not following formalities, and a creditor may try to pierce the corporate veil, break it, and take your personal assets. But the good thing is that you have the protection on day one, and it's a matter of being compliant with all the corporate formalities and everything that the law requires, so they can never reach your personal assets. But it's something to take into consideration. Governance. The corporation has more formalities from a governance perspective, and it's nothing new. You have heard about it. There's an initial meeting, right, to adopt the bylaws and elect the directors. The shareholders must do one annual meeting as required by the law. The company must file an annual report each year with the Department of State so it can be in good standing, and must issue shares to its owners. It's a share certificate pursuant to a subscription agreement. Simple enough, but the LLC is better. You're not required to have annual meetings. You could do an annual meeting, an initial meeting of the members, but you really don't have to if you don't want. You must pay an annual fee to the Department of State, but you don't have to make a filing as such. It's just paying $100 a year. And you don't have to issue anything. You can just have a contract that says who owns what and in what percentage. So even though the corporation does not have so many formalities from a governance perspective, the LLC gives you complete flexibility as to how you want to structure your corporate governance, which can be very attractive, especially if you're protecting your entity from a corporate veil perspective. Management, something that we need to understand. How will we run our business on a day-to-day? The corporation has a board, and the board actually has control of the business. The board is entrusted with the direction of the business and the decisions regarding financing, hiring of the executives, and the like. The board delegates authority to the officers, which, as you know, is the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. And the shareholders have very limited ability to approve certain things that we'll discuss later in the presentation, which are considered the major or extraordinary matters, which actually the board has to consult with the shareholders because it's going to be beyond their pay grade. But the LLC has total flexibility with respect to governance. With the LLC, you're not required to have a board. You're not required to have a president. You're not required to have a treasurer. You do whatever you want. You can have a king who's simply the managing member. He makes all the decisions. Or you could have the members manage the business by 51% of control. So you decide how you want to structure your business, which is very powerful depending on the needs and the composition of your particular company. And many people just do a board of managers if they like the concept of a board, if they like that collegiate way of making decisions. Transferability. Again, important. If you do not do a thing about it and you start a corporation, you don't have a shareholders agreement, your partner can literally sell his participation to the person sitting next door, and when you get off the stage, he'll say, look, this is your new partner. Because that's how corporations work. Corporations are made for bigger businesses, and they allow the shareholders to freely transfer their participation to strangers. So that's something that could be positive or negative, but negative in my book. And the transferees, the purchaser, the person who's your new partner, has the same rights and the same obligations as the prior shareholder had. And when what is being sold is actually a majority of the issued and outstanding shares, you have someone new who controls the business. Let's say you have 49% of this amazing business, that you were the founder. You never enter into a shareholder agreement. 51% is in the hands of a VC. That VC turns around, sells it to someone else, maybe a competitor, someone who you do not know, who you do not trust, and that person, by virtue of that transfer, actually controls your business. That's with the corporation. The LLC is a little bit more complex. In theory, the LLC ownership interests are transferable. However, and this is a legal nuisance some of you may appreciate, but most won't, When you sell your LLC interest, you're only transferring an economic interest. You're transferring the right to receive distributions and the right to enjoy and take deductions of the losses that the company may generate. But you're not transferring any administrative or managerial authority. As with the corporation, as I just explained, if you transfer 51% of the shares, you have an owner that controls the business. With the LLC, that person, even though he purchased 51% membership interest, he only has the right to receive 51% of the distributions. He has no right to manage the business. And another nuisance with LLCs is that all members must admit that person to the party. If not, that person is a total stranger, send him a check, he has nothing to do with the governance of a business. This is one of the biggest differences between corporations and LLCs, and something that I invite you to truly understand. Public disclosures. The corporations are horrendous from a public disclosure perspective. They have to file every year an annual report with the Department of State, and they have to disclose their balance sheet. Disclose publicly. If you go right now to the Department of State, and you can ask for the balance sheet of any corporation in Puerto Rico, and you can get a free, maybe you have to pay 10 cents per page, I don't know, but you're going to get a copy of that. In my book, from a perspective of confidentiality and your positioning in the market, you don't want a few people to know your finances for free, right? Let's talk about your competitors, right? Why would you want a competitor to know if you have a lot of money or if you're basically going bankrupt next month? Or why would you like a potential claimant to know that information? Let's say that your company's flush with cash. Someone's going to get the crazy idea to file a lawsuit and go after the money because they know that the money actually exists. So that's a big disadvantage with corporations. Any of you who have a corporation, think of it twice. Go to the Department of State, log on, you'll see your finances publicly shared. The LLC, you don't have to file anything. You just pay $100 a year, and no financial disclosure is required. This is a takeaway. If you think your finances are important, that you shouldn't share them with competitors and potential claimants, just convert your company to LLC. You're going to be doing a great thing for your business. Very quickly, because we're running out of time, capital contributions. The corporation only has as much capital as it is authorized in the certificate of incorporation. The corporation cannot sell its shares for less of its par value. That's all requirements and limitations of law. And dividends are always distributed according to the shareholdings of each shareholder. It's very, very straightforward. Everyone's used to that. The LLC is different. There's no limitation on equity. You can create as much equity as you want, and you do it through a private agreement, which is the operating agreement. You actually do not have to go to the Department of State to amend your certificate of organization to create more equity. And it's interesting because you don't even have to pay anything for the membership interest of an LLC. You could be the founder, you're putting 80% of the money, you want a partner to have 20%. He has no money, no intention of paying you anything. You can admit him as a member without him paying 1 cent. Maybe he just agrees to do some services or some coding. And the losses and the profits, you're not stuck in the box of the corporation, which says, shareholders get distribution pro rata according to the participation. You can do a waterfall and decide whatever you want. Fernando gets the first 5%, X person gets the next 10%, then come the preferred membership interest, and then everyone gets money again according to their common membership interest. So again, lots of flexibility in structuring your capital structure. Extraordinary affairs. This is what typically we have to consult with the owners of the business. The owners basically delegate to management, but management cannot make certain decisions on their own. In the context of the corporation, we need to talk to the shareholders and get the authorization for amendments to the certificate of incorporation, for mergers and consolidations, for sale or lease of substantially all the assets, and dissolution. These are things that actually could change the essence of the business. Here, the business could simply disappear because it gets dissolved. It could sell all of its assets and become a carcass with just cash. So basically, it affects the essence and the future prospects of the business. So it makes sense to ask the owners, the persons who actually have the equity, whether they want to do that or not. With the LLC, members basically approve certain things too. And that would be amending the certificate of incorporation, mergers and consolidations, and dissolution, as well as reestablishment of the personal capacity. Minority rights. Not every time we own control of our entities. Many times, after several rounds of financing, we become a minority owner of our own business, right? So we need to understand which minority rights by law are given to owners of participation in businesses. And it's very limited. That's the bad news. Contractually, we can achieve a lot, but if we just go by the black letter of the law, this is all we get. In corporations, they have to give shareholders access to the books and records. We have rights of appraisal in case of a merger, and we only get cash instead of equity. So we can go to court and say, look, judge, my participation was not worth $10,000. It was worth $15,000. Let's do an appraisal so I can get the fair value of my participation. And we have a right to get a stock certificate, which is not very valuable if the business is not successful. LLCs, same, access to corporate books. We get the right to admit new members, which is different than the corporation. We have a right to receive a copy of the operating agreement, and we can request the dissolution or repurchase of our participation upon resignation. That last bullet, I'm not going to delve too much into it because I have like 2 minutes, but that's very important. In an operating agreement, if you do not understand that little nuisance, you could have one of your partners leave and say, by law, you have to repurchase my participation right now. How much money is in the bank account? $200,000. I'm entitled to all of it. And that's the end of the business. Why? Because you, the entrepreneur, did not understand one of the nuances that the law provides. Fiduciary duties. Fiduciary duties basically are what persons who are entrusted with the management of the business have to do in order to actually be true and fair and loyal, right, to the persons who own the business. So the directors owe fiduciary duties, and the officers owe fiduciary duties to the shareholders, and the managers owe fiduciary duties basically to the members in the LLCs. And what does that mean on a very high level? You cannot be asleep at the wheel. You have to know what's going on in your business. You have to make informed decisions. You have to ask questions. And you cannot put your own personal interest before the interest of the business. So you have to be a good guy, and you have to be actually competent. Duration, termination, liquidation, and dissolution. In the context of both the LLCs and the corporation, the duration can be perpetual limited depending on what the entrepreneurs want to achieve. Dissolution is regulated by law. In the case of the corporation, liquidation requires payment to creditors first. As you know, the bank gets paid first, then to the equity holders pro rata. And the LLC, again, is very flexible. We can do whatever we want. We can distribute the proceeds as we contractually agree to. Taxation is probably the only funny slide in the presentation. Very, very high level, but you need to understand. Corporations are subject to double taxation. They get taxed on their corporate income once, and once a dividend is paid out to the shareholders, it gets a second level of taxation. We could be talking about 42, 43% taxation in total for the corporation, which maybe makes sense for a publicly traded company, but not for a startup like yours. And the LLC, we can either elect for it to be taxed as a corporation or a partnership. It has that flexibility. But if you elect for it to be taxed as a partnership, you only get one level of taxation, which is at the level of the member at its marginal tax rate. So for the corporation, just to give you an example, while they could be taxed on the entire income stream at 42%, someone who has an LLC interest and has elected partnership treatment could get taxed maybe at 33% or 32%. So a 10% savings, I think that's reasonable. It's 10% more of your money that you actually keep in your pocket. So it's something to truly consider. Just summing it up. Corporation advantages. Cost effective. Everyone is familiarized with the corporations, and there's a lot of legal precedent regarding how they operate, right? But has certain disadvantages. A lot of formalities, as I said. Management is fractured. You need that board. You need those officers. You need to have the meetings. And it requires financial disclosure, which for me is the biggest turnoff if we talk about a corporation. And capital is very regulated, so you're not as flexible as you would like to be in order to achieve your goals. And, of course, that double taxation problem. Highlight that. Okay. LLCs, very quickly. Very limited formalities. As I always say, here in Puerto Rico, no one follows formalities. It's just true. People don't think about, I need the subscription agreement, I need my bylaws, I need to have my shareholders in place, I need to have that annual meeting, I have to send the notice 60 days before the meeting, it has to say, no one does that. So it actually puts you in harm's way if you have to comply with the formalities. But with the LLC, you can opt to have no formalities. It has a lot of flexibility from a management perspective. there's no financial disclosure required, the capital structure is completely flexible, and that little nuisance, there's no double taxation. Disadvantages, negotiating the operating agreement could take some time, it could be costly, and there's very limited familiarity at the level of the governments regarding, and the local agencies regarding how they work. So, the winner is the LLC. Everyone took more time. I'm going to take one more minute. Pull your arm down. No. So that's it. And I had 20 seconds left. So any questions?
Hi. Thank you for an excellent presentation. How hard is it to convert from a corporation to an LLC?
One-page document. Just fill in the blanks and file it. That's it.
Excellent.
Just you want to make sure that the name is available and that you actually do your operating agreement after the fact. But converting as such, one-page document. Very easy.
Thank you.
Fernando va a estar afuera, ¿verdad?, para contestar cualquier pregunta, así que muchas gracias a ambos panelistas.